So today we're going to take a closer look at this species right here, the eastern red cedar, which is actually a species of Juniperus virginiana. And it's probably the most common conifer out here in the Midwest. In fact, it's so common that it's hurting native grasslands because without fire, the species springs up in high abundance and chokes out native grassland species. But doesn't detract from its interesting biology, and we're going to take a closer look at specifically its reproductive organs today because it's that season. Pollen's in the air, and these are starting to get into reproductive mode. Let's take a closer look. So here you can see the yellow of them. These are the male eastern red cedar trees, and they are chock full of cones right now. Eastern red cedar is dioecious, meaning individuals are either male or female. I don't think they're ever both. And all of that yellow, like I said, are the male cones, chock full of pollen. This is a wind-pollinated species, so they got to make a lot of it. Let's take a closer look. And here are the male cones. As you can see, some are just starting to open up. So much pollen in here. Look at that. And that's just so that they can find a female ovule by chance. Alright, and here are some male cones, also born at the tips of these little stem-like branches. You can see these are just starting to separate. Those scales, those big circular scales there separating, and inside are the little sacs containing the pollen. And as you saw, it pours out of the plant. A little bit of breeze carries thousands upon millions of pollen grains into the air. And sometimes that causes a lot of discomfort and allergy attacks for people, but it works for these. Here's the female tree. I know that because it is covered in bluish berry-like cones. And if we take a closer look at these branches, we can see some of the details up close. Alright, so to find female cones, you have to look on the tips of these blunt-looking branches there. If you can kind of see against my pasty skin there, they look a little discolored, a little more yellow than the rest of the branch, and those are usually where the female cones sit. But to see them in any detail, you're going to have to use some considerable magnification. Alright, and here we see the female cone of Juniperus virginiana. This is very small and is totally pushing the limits of my magnification and recording abilities, so I apologize for the quality, but this is something you don't really get to see every day, or at least you see it and don't recognize it's there because it's so small. The outside bracts there will swell eventually around the seeds to form the berry-like cones that are characteristic of this group, but even more interesting are those two little hole-like structures there. Those are the micropiles that lead down into the ovules, and those are essentially just a little tube, and that's where the pollen will crawl down in. Well, not crawl down in, but the pollen will put its tube down into and fertilize the ovule. And so that is a completely open hole to the rest of the environment. You know, it's not closed up like you would see wrapped in an ovary like an angiosperm. And that's why, in part, we call gymnosperms naked seeds, because they're always exposed to the environment. Now, this has 2 ovules in it, which I think is pretty cool. Most of the ones I found on this tree only had 1. And it's those scales on the outside of the micropile that swell up and form these berry-like swollen structures here. Those are still technically cones, but they're mimicking fruit because they're bird dispersed. Birds will eat these, digest some of the outer layer, and then go poop the seeds ready to germinate, hopefully somewhere where there's plenty enough sun for the seedling to do well.